Hello and welcome to the PCMA GMC webinar, Bridging the Gap, Unifying Events and Education for Enhanced Member Engagement. My name is Erica Martinez, and I'm the co-chair of the PCMA GMC Professional Development Committee. First of all, a big thank you to our sponsor, Cadmium, for supporting this webinar. I'm very excited to introduce our two speakers, Raja Venkata and Jennifer Nanny. Raja Venkata is a seasoned SaaS and healthcare education technology executive with 18 years of experience leading the growth, digital transformation, and strategic initiatives across multiple industries. He brings a Wharton MBA, award-winning product expertise, and a passion for innovation, along with a love of tea making and cartooning with his two daughters. Jennifer Nanny is an accomplished association and membership leader with deep expertise in strategic management, communication, and data-driven organizational growth. A lifelong learner and passionate project leader, she is dedicated to empowering communities and enjoys time with her family and a good book whenever she can. Raja and Jen, take it away.
Thank you. Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you again for joining us. Firstly, we wanted to thank the GMC PCMA team for giving us this opportunity to share our ideas. In this, hopefully next 45, 50 minutes, we are going to talk a little bit about how events and education departments can collaborate, how and why that's important. And we'll also share some examples on how some of those collaborations have reaped business outcomes. But before we do that, let's get some polling in. Jen, if you wouldn't mind.
Yes, thank you so much. So just by either a show of hands, you can either come on camera or put it in the chat or just use the Zoom feature. But who all is in events? Okay. And who is in education or continuing education? I see some events coming through. Education, okay. And then I see a both. That was my next question. So who wears both hats or at least works closely with both events and education? Awesome. Perfect. Well, the whole reason why we're here today, of course, is how we can bridge the gap between events and education. Like Raja said, thank you so much to the GMC PCMA for having us and for Cadmium for sponsoring, and of course to all of you for spending your lunch with us. Hopefully you will find some insight that you can use and bring back to your teams. So we wanted to talk with you all today about how you can bridge the gap between education and events and provide just an overall better customer service experience for your members and constituent engagement. So even though they are technically two different departments in a lot of areas, they actually have similar goals between engagement, learning, and impact, but they typically work in silos. I know personally with ACLM, where I work, they are two separate departments, and up until recently, they worked very separately, and this caused a lot of issues and friction. Because at the end of the day, we are speaking to the same audience. We have to have the same voice, we have the same goals and outcomes. But working in different systems with different timelines, we had issues between our technology stack, the workflow coordination. This, of course, opened more opportunity for errors and speaker logistic issues, and all of that. We knew there was a problem that we wanted to fix. So hopefully today you'll find some kind of nuggets of information that you can bring back on how you can kind of break down the silos and work closer together.
Awesome. Thank you, Jen. Good afternoon again. Thanks for joining us. In terms of going through the solution here, we've tried to break it down into multiple portions. Jen and I have an MBA, and if some of you have been through the process, there's always some steps involved. They're either 3, they're 4, or 5. We just went with 4 steps just because it makes logical sense. So we've broken down the review into 4 different portions. First, we'll talk about how do you find symptoms and challenges of misalignment, because you can't fix things unless you find out, and knowing or tracing the symptoms is the first step towards addressing it. So that's part 1 of our webinar. The second one is, why do we care? Why is it important? We'll talk about the impact both from the ground staff and then also the staff, the leadership staff and the executive team what it means for the associations and other organizations in general. So we'll talk about why that's important. Part three, what can we do to fix it? We have tried to again break this down into smaller portions so that we can tackle different areas of how we can address this misalignment and how do we bring in more cohesive approach towards defining and designing education. And last but not the least, we'll talk about data in action. We look at some common examples about how you can leverage metrics in your software and then make sure that you're better serving your members. So 4 parts: symptoms, cause, how to fix it, and then looking at some data.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Raja. Like he said, our first one, of course, is the symptoms and challenges of misalignment. So when it comes to the challenges with misalignment, there are common friction points like these. There's, siloed planning, conflicting priorities, there's disjointed data, and missed cross promotion. So with these types of friction points, of course, it does reduce your ability to plan strategically. When you have silos, it does make it harder to map your members and your constituents' learning journeys. There's different pipelines between education and events. The design experience is different, and really they should actually reinforce each other, but a lot of times they work against each other. And of course, the lack of shared data and insights. When you have separate systems, that typically means you have separate data. And trying to combine that data and tell that story isn't always clear. So you want to find ways to kind of make them talk to one another. Some of that data could look like participant interest and the types of platforms they use, how like their learning outcomes. And sometimes with these silos, those things are not always captured and they're not leveraged collectively like they should be. Again, data is king, it tells a story. And sometimes when you don't have that crucial information, you're kind of telling your audience the wrong story. And then really, to me, the biggest piece from my outside of the data and the insights is really that missed opportunity for cross promotion. When they aren't tightly connected, we do lose the chance to kind of extend that learning, whether it's before the event, during, or after. And you also miss the opportunity to introduce different educational pathways to your members and the constituents. And I feel like that not only is it lost revenue, but it feels very fragmented to the user and confusing. So I don't know if any of you want to put in the chat, but can you share if any of these things have happened to you and your association or organizations?
And while we're waiting for folks to chime in, Jen, one thing I have seen a lot is the missed cross promotion. That is one of the biggest missed opportunities when they're planning an event or a webinar, but they don't talk to each other. It is definitely a missed cross promotion on related topics.
Yes, agreed. And I see Dina put yes frequently. And yes, the data tells the story. Thank you for sharing that, Polly. Okay. So obviously, fragmentation will produce lost opportunities, duplicative work, and just an overall clunky experience. But really and truly, I think, it limits your innovation. When the teams aren't regularly collaborating, new ideas aren't forming, you're kind of just doing what you can to stay afloat and sometimes just survive, not necessarily thrive. And I don't know about y'all, but with us, we've had instances where our education team was working on one thing and then our events team was working on another. Come to find out, it was the exact same thing. So that duplication was happening without us even realizing it. And that causes, again, friction between teammates, but then it's also hard to know kind of whose is priority, especially if the data and stuff doesn't match. You also have an overlap in content. There's different outreach overlap, which at the end of the day, costs time and it costs resources and just like that mental energy that you bring to work. And then I think a biggest piece that we need to consider always is the user. Having that inconsistent learner and member experience, it's just not a good feeling. Have you ever been to a store and had a bad experience? Think about that, and then think about when you go buy something on Amazon, how quick and easy it is. Everybody wants that. Time is limited. So the different systems and processes can create confusion. It gets them frustrated, and the more frustrated they are, the less likely they are to want to come back and participate in more. So you really want to think about how they can come together so that you're not turning your customer off and weakening the overall experience. So why is this important? We're moving on to part 2. I do see that Tracy put in the chat, agreed, that missed cross promotion is one of the biggest. I could not agree more. I don't know about your organization, but with ours, a lot of times the events and the continuing education kind of feed into each other. Depending on where someone is on their lifestyle medicine journey, they might want to start out with a course and then dive deeper from the event. Or we have the event and then they want to dive deeper through a longer course. And without that connection, the user is confused, they're not happy, they feel like they've missed out. Okay, so overall, you want to create one experience for your audience, because at the end of the day, it's the same audience. You're talking to the same people. It's important to create a unified experience because it strengthens your overall trust with your user. When the touch points align, your members or your constituents, they feel supported rather than kind of shuffled around and passed from one department to another. It also kind of reinforces that when you have a single audience and you're focused on that, it means that there's a shared responsibility across the team. Both teams and within the organization learn how they contribute to how the members are learning, how they're engaging, and that perceived value, which is incredibly important. If that isn't aligned, then it can cause a lot of friction. And I can say that from personal experience. So I'm kind of like I said, too, with our different journeys and where your members are, the events can ignite interest into the organization, but the education opportunities can deepen that interest. So the more they work together, the more it kind of creates that holistic learning experience that goes just from the inspirational piece to the actual application of what you're trying to teach them. And then, of course, events offer that real-time connection. And I don't know about y'all, but with everything that happened from the pandemic and everything going virtual, a lot of people crave that real-time connection. And then that continuing education piece will sustain that growth and that desire to have that real-time connection that your events provide. So just at the end of the day, your collaboration is going to amplify your impact. And when you collaborate, you're going to offer a better continuity of continuing education. You're offering more value and a stronger ROI. So why does it matter? Does anyone have any thoughts they want to share in the chat as to why they think it matters? And no pressure to. We can always answer, but we definitely want to make sure that you feel engaged in the opportunity to speak. But kind of like what the bullets say, and like I just mentioned, it's the same audience. And I don't know about you, but our members are flooded with information. Their attention is scarce. We work with physicians, clinicians across the whole healthcare spectrum. So they are working long shifts, they've got families. We have very little time to capture their attention. And we know that our members want relevance, they want value. So how can we offer that to them? And we also know that our events in continuing education serve the same people and they're not always in sync. So we want to make sure that we are showcasing relevant information that will continue to amplify their impact within their patient populations. Also, I think this one is key, but members don't see the education department. They don't see the events department. They don't see the membership department. They see the organization that they've bought into. It's important that they feel that the organization is working cohesively and that we're intentional and we're connected, because I can assure you that when you aren't intentional and cohesive and connected, they can feel it. And that's not an experience that I think anyone wants. And then just really and truly, at the end of the day, having a cohesive message and working together will reinforce your same mission, whether it's the conference session, it's continuing education course. For us, our goal is how do we advance lifestyle medicine knowledge and practice? That's our same goal across the entire organization. And by working together, we're able to do that. So think about how you can build not just pathways and not, or how you can build pathways, not just standalone moments, and introduce maybe an event topic and then follow that through with continuing education to build that mastery, and then how future events can reinforce that learning. And at the end of the day, the result will be less missed touch points, a redundancy of efforts, and again, that reduction of overall clunky experiences for your member.
Thanks, Jen. So we've looked at how Jen has walked us through how you can help the members have a more cohesive experience, make sure it's not individual touch points, but more continuum of service that presents your organization as a better brand. Now let's take a step higher and then find out, what does this mean for your leadership? Why should your leadership care? And if you are bought into it, how can you present the value of this cohesive relationship to your leadership? We've broken this down into four portions or four areas. The first one is member loyalty. Again, as Jen has said, the more cohesive your experience is for your members, the more likely they are to have that loyalty when they are perceiving you as a brand. I bring back to what Jen has said. They don't see the education department, they don't see the events department, they see, in this case, ACLM. And the stronger their brand is, the more likely the renewals will be. So, as we all know, this is one of the big focus areas for member associations, which is driving member loyalty. The second portion is, or the second area is brand presence. In terms of making sure when people visit your website, oftentimes we have seen scenarios where when the education team and the events team is not working in tandem, regardless of whichever software you use, the experience can be fragmented. And not only looks wise, where certain things look out of brand or out of unison, it just doesn't feel like you're going through the same website when you move from one area to the other. And then in this area where you're constantly interfaced with a lot of malicious attacks and suspicious emails, it is important to make sure people trust your brand, people trust your online presence, and you're going to make it as smooth as possible if you want to increase the member loyalty and renewals. So brand presence is a big portion to communicating the value of this unified experience. The third, operational efficiency. So it's not only making sure that you're able to convert stuff from live events into online activities, it is also making the best use of your staff time where they're working on things that matter. So going back to what Jen has mentioned in the beginning of our webinar, she was talking about how she discovered sometimes they were live events happening and then webinars happening on the exact same topic. And maybe that was important to make sure you have multiple members to be engaged. But if you can space them out in a more strategic way, you're probably going to reinforce what they learned in the live event via a webinar or vice versa. So operational efficiency is not only measured in terms of time savings, it is also measured in terms of doing the right thing for your members. And how can the unified experience help you all make the best use of time, deliver the right content that resonates with your members and your non-members? The last one is revenue. We intentionally kept it at the bottom because we believe that revenue generation will need to be intentional and methodical, especially if you're trying to think about it at a medical association or any association level. That's why we kept it at the end, because once you make sure your cohesive experience is providing loyal members, it is enhancing the brand presence, it is making sure your staff can have the right activities, the revenue will be a logical next step. It's not the afterthought of it. It is making sure you're very intentional in each step in your process. So not just non-use revenue, it's not just renewals, it's how are you building that journey to make sure they can come back to you for renewals. So we believe these are the four key areas in which a unified experience can help your learners. Before we get into part three, I'd love to hear if anyone else has any other ideas about how this could benefit association leadership. You're welcome to unmute. You're welcome to put it on the chat. Just curious if you've seen any other areas that this could impact. Again, no pressure. We will go through others after in part three and part four as well. Wonderful. So let's move on. We'll go through solution design and then we'll talk about part three. All right. So in this case, what we're going to do is we will talk about what we can do to fix this. And what we've done here is we've identified different areas to get some creative juices flowing. So what we'll do is we've identified 4 areas in which we can discuss as a team and then come up with ideas on how to address this. Perfect. So the first area is what's one thing that you can implement to better align your event and education efforts. That STEM question is the same. We are now going to focus on 4 different areas. The first area is shared planning tools. So in terms of coming up with ideas, you're welcome to either put them in the chat or unmute and speak about your ideas. And here, what we're trying to find out is how do you operationalize the unification of these departments? What kind of planning tools could you think about? If you're already working on them, wonderful. We'd love to hear from them. If you think certain things might be more helpful, please feel free to chime in. Wonderful. I see Polly mentioned Monday board. Yep, wonderful. Jen, you've mentioned an interesting use case the last time we spoke. Do you mind talking about that? And then I think it was similar to that Monday board, if I'm recollecting it correctly.
Yeah, so we use Asana for our project management tool. It allows us to add notes, create different projects. There's a whole calendar. For instance, we created a Scrum meeting for all of our communications from our marketing department. And this is where events, education, practice advancement, membership, we all come together and we pull up that project shared planning tool. And we go through 15 minutes every Tuesday of what's coming for that week and the next week. And it just kind of triggers all the different things that a team might need to know about and how they align with one another. So that's something that we do. And then, of course, we have different cross-departmental meetings outside of like your normal staff meeting and your director's meeting to ensure that we are communicating up front versus scrambling on the back end.
Thanks, Jen. Polly, based on what you heard, are you using Monday in a similar fashion in your organization as well?
Yeah, we use it across the board. The majority of our project tasks, we tag each other from the team if something's needed, and we can also share with our clients if it's needed. We tend not to overwhelm our clients because, as you just said, most of them are in the medical field and they are too busy. They don't need to be tagged unless we really need a signature or something. So it's only for the important things that we share. But yeah, we do it across the board with dates and times, and it shows us when we're behind, when we're falling at risk, and all of that. So
great. Thank you for sharing, Polly. And Dina says, yeah, Dina has used Asana as well. And similar to how Jen described, it's difficult to start. It's been difficult to get staff on board with my current job. Okay. Dina, just curious, you're welcome to put on chat or talk about it. Do you feel Asana is helping you out, or are you thinking about having more tools or processes that could help you to get your staff on board? No pressure, just curious based on your question.
Well, I will say I try to replicate how I use Asana at my previous job, at my current job. There were several staff members. Well, it's not something that's mandated enterprise-wide, so it's difficult to get everybody on board. They often see it as yet another step for them to do their work. So I found that it was only a few people who were using it. I'm still using it just to manage my own projects. I oversee the annual meeting team. Well, it's a team of one, so there's a lot of things for me to do. So I'm really hoping we can get more people on board with using it. Right now, I think that I'm just starting to create the project for 2026. So I'm going to keep doing it, and I'm hoping other people will get on board. We do use Microsoft Teams a lot. We've created specific channels for our external vendors so we can share that information. And it's good with sharing and communicating, but the timeline piece is what's missing, which is why I really like Asana for that. So I'm hopeful that I'll at least get the core planning team on board with using it. We've we're using the free version now. I canceled my paid subscription just because I felt like we were spending money on a tool that not everyone was using. So I'm hoping that we get there.
And Dina, I feel I can relate. For the longest time, our organization didn't. And it's kind of like that adoption model. You had your early users. And we kind of got to a point where we almost had to have a few projects fail, not necessarily fail per se, but in terms of like pre-planning and that reduction of stress, we had to get to that point to really have others kind of see why it was important to implement a shared planning tool like Asana. We know that there's going to be a few within our organization that probably won't ever use it. But I mean, I'm talking like the top leaders. That's okay. Their focus should not be on that. So I say all of that to just continue putting your processes in place and doing what you can. And the more consistent you are, it will create kind of that shared buy-in and also trainings. Setting aside time for trainings and showing them like how easy it is and how much of a reduction in emails and time and all of that can really help. And then I know Raja, I don't want to keep speaking, but I know Karina also said they use Basecamp. I've worked in an organization that did a Basecamp and an Asana, which to me is a duplication. But I think really it's finding the tool that works. And maybe Asana isn't, but maybe Slack, Dina, or Jules might be something that you could do instead. So for what that's worth. Hang in there. You're doing great.
Totally. And we use Basecamp as well. And Karina, I totally agree with that. It could look overwhelming, especially if you have too much info. One thing which I'm curious is if Basecamp has some level of a calendar feature or something similar. It's been a while that I used the latest version of Basecamp. Back then, we had a calendar feature where we could see the key milestones for an event or for a education activity, and that made the interface look a little less overwhelming. Um, so again, not sure about the latest version, but that's one thing that comes to mind to make that interface a little less overwhelming for everyone.
Thanks for the info, Raja. I'd love to be able to answer that, but I have to say I haven't looked at Basecamp in a while because it was overwhelming for me as well. But I'll check in on that. Thank you.
Absolutely. Yeah, thank you for giving us your inputs. This is very, very interactive and helpful.
I just want to say it does have a calendar feature. So then we use those as like milestones for across departments that we have here working on the same project. But I think it's just more so the piece of getting all individuals to work within Basecamp is the challenge.
Thanks, Pauline. The buy-in from everyone seems to be a recurring theme that we are hearing from multiple people. But like Jen said, keep doing what you're doing and we'll get there. It's hard to get 100% adoption, but we'll get as close as we can with these things.
Yeah, I think you're right, the buy-in, because I have to tell you that I'm sometimes the worst culprit because I'm in 20,000 things at once, and my team is just like, we know you've done your part, you just haven't marked it off. And I'm like, yeah, I'll do that. So I do think it's buy-in, but I think having that meeting with everybody, telling them why and how it expedites and makes you more efficient, is really important.
Absolutely. Thank you, Holly. Well, great conversation. Then continuing on the same theme, we now move on to the second discussion area, which is communication practices. So when you're thinking about these, think about what kind of channels do you think would work best? How do you update one department to the other? What kinds of tools and processes can you put in place to make sure the information flows from one department to the other? Because the whole purpose is breaking down the silos. So how could you use communication to your advantage? That's the second focus area.
I don't know about y'all, but we had recently had an in-person event and we're all virtual, so everyone's used to communicating via Teams. And we had a little bit of a breakdown in part of our event. And instead of getting up we had some individuals troubleshooting in kind of the staff room, and instead of getting up and going and having kind of a face-to-face conversation, explaining some of the issues that were happening, some talking points, like just, person to person, it was all done via Teams, which in a virtual environment is great. But when you're in person, it's really important to kind of pause and either pick up the phone or walk across down the hall and have something and just kind of open that line of communication and just continuing to share your issues, your celebrations, how things are working, not working. And that way you can lean on each other. Just because we found that it is easy to break down when things go wrong. So just making sure that you keep those lines open. And if you are fortunate to have in person, get up from your chair, go walk, say hello, and then you can kind of rally together. But I don't know if anyone else has anything. I see someone says we use Ring Central chats a lot, which Polly, you said that. I didn't even know Ring Central had a chat feature, so that's exciting. I learned something new. Thank you. Does anyone else have anything in terms of communication practices they would recommend or share to better align? And if not, that's okay. I feel like this one's pretty straightforward, Raja. That's
Totally. Wonderful. Well, the third area we're going to talk about is content synergy. So this area talks about how could you reuse the content that you're having, that you're delivering at the events into enduring components and vice versa. How do you repurpose the on-demand components into live events? And what best practices and tools could we think about to build that synergy? Great. Holly says we are building via our instructional design department microlearnings. Love that. And is that department also designing or looking at data from live events, Polly?
They are, yes.
Great. We've already seen how breaking down the silos can look like. Thanks for sharing, Polly.
One thing that we use is the data, of course. We have a association analytics. It's a data analytics platform, but we look for common themes that our members are speaking about and asking each other about. And then we are looking at the content that we already have and sharing that with them, but then also using that to formulate our strategy for the coming year. So if someone's talking a lot about like women's health and prescription de-escalation, we have actually presented that to both our events and our education team. And so they are looking out for their workshops for the event, as well as potential speakers to speak on those topics, while also then pulling information from our courses to not only provide that as an opportunity for our members to learn more, but then how can we expand on it since we know that's a topic of interest. Does anyone have anything else they might want to share?
I think one other thing we've seen with our other groups that we help out is how they try to think about enduring not as a just-in-time component, but trying to use that as a trickle-down approach, similar to what we've seen from Poly, where they would have instructional design component or departments added, where they are looking at chunking down this event into multiple on-demand components or multiple on-demand webinars so that you're trickling down smaller pieces of information and continuing that engagement, sort of expanding the horizon rather than just doing it at a single point in time. Because online education can also be in bits and pieces, and you can extend the engagement window as well. That seemed to be really resonating with some of our other customers.
So Raja, Polly said, can you she asked, the answer, yes, of course. How you decide which story to tell. Do you brainstorm? Is it 90% got it right, or why the 10% got it wrong? Don't know if you wanted to answer that.
Sure. So, Polly, just to elaborate on that, are we talking about repurposing a larger live component into smaller components? Was that the context, or could you give
No,
a little insight?
sometimes our team has, we're looking at the data, the evaluations, the results, and sometimes people focus on, and we often have brainstorming sessions on what is the story we want to tell. Is it the positive story, or are we really focusing on the negative part? How do you really decide which is the more critical component of the story to share, because one puts it all in the glorious light, right? And another one says there's room for improvement. So I'm just curious what other people are doing.
I mean, you have to personally hold space for both. I think the 10% is important, but if the 90% you got right, I think you're doing something. And if your overall feedback is kind of more in favor of the 90%, it's not that you want to change everything that you're doing and disregard that 10%, but there is some information within that you could make changes. And we get feedback on courses and such halfway through of, oh, you should have said it this way. Well, that's something we're going to disregard because that's just a personal preference. And we're very intentional about why we say certain things the way that we do. But if someone says, yeah, this 90% was great, but this piece of, what is it, like the way the research was presented was really challenging, that's something to us that would be noteworthy because that person's probably not the only person that's experienced that. And that tells us that maybe we could try something else. And I think of doing kind of like the scientific method, try something, see if it works. If it doesn't, stop, revamp, try again. I think just being malleable and willing to kind of align with what your audience overall needs are in the loudest voice. But again, hold space for the other stuff, but don't let that kind of reframe everything. Because again, that's 10%. So hope that answers your question. Raja, did you have anything else you wanted to add on this one, or would you like to go to the next?
This is great. Yeah, next one would be great, Jen. Thank you.
Thank you.
Awesome. All right. So the last one of my favorites. How are we talking about an objective assessment of this and what kind of data points could be used? Polly did set us up on a good path with this area where we were already talking about some data and metrics. So here we are talking about what kinds of things you could use to make sure the event and education departments would align. So we've added some seed items like post-event surveys or key performance indicators. Love to hear from the team if there are other metrics that you think would be helpful. Again, back to our goal, how are we aligning the event and education teams and what data points help us to drive that story? And one thing we've seen a lot with our other association customers is the leveraging data and analytics to their fullest extent. So to give you an example, one of the association companies, they have designed a dashboard on their system with the key performance indicators where they were looking at the number of enrollments, the number of repeat learners, and then the number of learners participating in two or more activities/events. Those were the three metrics that they had. Now, these three are very specific to this organization, but to get some creative juices flowing, the reason we share that here is you can define your own matrices and keep track of them on a periodic basis. And this particular organization was following it religiously, where every month in their monthly executive review, they would look at this dashboard and say, what are the activities we did this month? And how has or have not these initiatives helped us with these indicators? Number of enrollments, number of completions, and number of learners who've taken more than two activities. So that's one idea about how you could think about leveraging data and see, did you have more live events this month? Or did you have a mix of live and enduring? Did that help you with more enrollments for your education products? Those kinds of things. So that was very thoughtful and interesting.
Personally love looking at enrollments and then completion. If you have a large number of enrollments and then you have a small number of completions, that right there is telling you a lot. Is the course too long? Is it boring? Is it relevant? Yes, it's exciting that you get people enrolled, but if they're not finishing your courses, then they're less likely to take a second course and become a, a what is it? Dual enrollment learner. So I think just looking at that too uh, is one of the biggest ones for us personally. But
Thanks for
well,
sharing, Jen.
yeah. If no one has anything else, I think we'll go ahead and continue so that we can ensure there's time for Q&A. But feel free to put anything else in the chat at any point. Happy to have you share. So at the end of the day, when you think about everything that we just discussed, it's really important that your platforms unify you as a team and bring you together. I think the biggest thing that you can do to kind of open that door for collaboration is inviting all of the necessary stakeholders to the table. We have started doing kind of one-off meetings for new course launches, the event, and having everyone present so that we can all ensure that we have that same base level of knowledge of like what's happening, who it's impacting, what it's going to be about. Then you kind of break off the necessary meetings so you're not monopolizing everyone's time. But just having everyone have that initial chance to have a voice and a seat has gone a really long way with our internal team. Also, some of the project management tools like we discussed, Trello, Basecamp, Asana, Monday, Teams, all of those, whatever works best for you and your association, the fact that you're using something is important. I always like to have a tool that you can reference back to. A lot of us are moving fast and furious, and we maybe don't have a full process for something. But by using some of these tools, you at least have that historical record as well that you can always go back to and then pause, reflect, and revamp should you need. I will say one thing we didn't mention at the beginning, ACLM actually is a Cadmium user, and we started out with just our event piece, but we recently completed using Ethos for our learning management system. So we're really excited about that, along with, of course, the event, because it helps us talk together and make things a little bit more streamlined for our users. And then I will say one thing too, don't just gather the data, actually take the time to sit and talk about it. That will help you become more unified. And of course, look at the feedback. I know Polly mentioned the 90 and the 10%. We look at all feedback. We maybe just sometimes say, thank you so much for sharing that feedback. And that's all. But it's still important for us to kind of pause and reflect and look at it. Especially if you look at it 1 year and then the next, and you're getting that same feedback. Maybe in 2023, it was great, thank you so much. But in 2024, if you heard the same thing, well, then that's showing us a small pattern. So we should look at that. But just finding something that you can use. This is not a sell for Cadmium. I am not paid by Cadmium. But for us, it was finding something that unified both our learning management system as well as our event platform to reduce the duplication, improve your data workflow, and support the accreditation needs. And for us, Cadmium and their LMS and event tools were able to fulfill that need. So whatever that is for you and your association, I highly recommend that you find something that at least speaks to one another, because that will just make your life a lot easier.
Absolutely. Now that we've looked at the 3 key areas of the solution design, we've looked at symptoms, we've looked at how or why is it important for the staff and for the leadership. And part 3, we've looked at 4 areas as to how we can potentially address this. Let's look at a couple of examples and get into part 4 of this discussion. Here we're going to talk about how can you leverage data, and we look at 2 examples of how you can leverage some data points and then use it for bridging the gap. All right, so that's the question that we started off with. The question here is, what are some of the data points that the events team can leverage from the education team or the learning management system for driving better insights and member service? So that's the question. Curious to see if the team had any ideas before we talk about a couple of examples. If they've seen any particular LMS data that you thought was very, very valuable for the events team to know. Love to hear your feedback if you have seen anything. And LMS would be learning management system, could be your on-demand or enduring component. So we're talking about some reports from that system. No worries. What we'll do is we'll give a couple of examples and then love to see if the team had any other ideas about both of these examples. So we will look at our first example. So I'll try to explain this particular graph. It looks a little busy, but it's definitely not that complicated. This graph talks about two areas. One is opioid diagnosis, and the other is opioid prescription. These are two competencies that this particular medical specialty association wanted to measure as a part of their strategic objectives. Now, they had several live events. They have several on-demand activities. Some of those activities are focusing on opioid prescription. Some are focusing on opioid diagnosis. Some are focusing on both. When they leverage the LMS platform, the Ethos platform, they've tagged the quiz questions with one of these two tags. So let's say they had quiz number 1. It has 5 questions. They said question number 1, 2, 3 is about opioid diagnosis. Question number 4 and 5 is about opioid prescription. For another activity, it may be a different story. Maybe for activity number 5, all the 7 questions may be on opioid diagnosis. But the key portion is every quiz question was tagged with an organizational objective. And after every quarter, they used to look at a report like this that used to tell them at a competency level, what was their learners' performance in each of the competencies. Any questions on the data that I just explained before we get into the analysis of this? Does anyone have any questions on what this graph means? Wonderful. All right. So based on this graph, we are seeing two different, Jen. So based on this graph, we're actually seeing two different columns. One says opioid diagnosis, one said opioid prescription. And here the data says 61% of every quiz question on opioid diagnosis was answered correctly. 39% of quiz questions on opioid diagnosis were answered incorrectly. So that's one observation. The second observation on the right-hand side is 76% of every quiz question on opioid prescription was answered incorrectly. So those are the two observations. Based on what we saw here, the department decided that they would want to have dedicated live events on opioid prescription because it's clearly a systemic gap with their learners. 76% are getting it wrong. And it's not just one activity, it's across a continuum of education activities. So in their next live annual conference, they added specific tracks for opioid prescription and specific tracks for opioid diagnosis. And this particular insight was not available before because they were not able to tag the quiz questions and tag it to things that were more meaningful to the medical association. So that was one example. Any questions or feedback on this based on the conclusion that we've just shared? Wonderful. We look at one more example. So this is called, as the name suggests, is a content consumption pattern example. And here what we're looking at is we're looking at the activity completion report filtered by demographics. So we've already filtered it by member type, and we've already filtered it by the years of experience. And here you can see that this particular organization clearly has a lot of learners interested in nursing-related content, closely followed by ethics-related content. And then if you look at the bottom portion of it, there is growing interest in emergency medicine, palliative care as well. They looked at this data in the previous quarter, and then with the use of LMS, it was previously in the lower 200s. Now it jumped up to like 624. So they were looking at those trends, and then they tried to add more nursing and ethics content. But more importantly, they started looking at emergency medicine as a growing discipline as far as the areas of interest is concerned, and ordered more live events for emergency medicine. So those are two examples. Obviously, every association has their own story in terms of how they review the data. Are there any other examples or any other ideas that the team has in terms of how they've leveraged data? It could be data from your learning management system or your event management system. On a phone, no worries. We'll share this as well afterwards. Love to hear your feedback and any other additional use cases that you may have. So there's definitely a lot of examples, and you can always customize it based off of your organization and your discipline as well. The key thing is being more intentional about your demographics and what data you're collecting in your AMS and your LMS.
Thank you so much, Raja. I think too, sometimes you got to let everything soak in and then the wheels kind of start turning. So hopefully what we've shared today has helped with that. But what you've learned so far is really just how to identify gaps, to think about the ones between events and education. And then, of course, you can also extend that further to membership and other departments. How to align goals for a seamless member experience, and just overall user experience to want them coming back for more.
Yeah, and we've also looked at some real world tools such as Asana, Monday, and Basecamp, how you could potentially use that to improve collaboration. And then we've also looked at how you can leverage communication processes, data, and improved transparency between departments to break down the department silos. All right, so we have a little bit of a discussion here since we have a few minutes. Based on what we discussed here, what's one action you'd like to take in the next 7 days to bridge the gap between education and events? You're welcome to add more than one. You're welcome to add it in the chat or unmute, whatever works best for you.
There's no right or wrong answer. I know personally, coming off of an event, I'm curious to see our most attended events, especially with our online audience from our live event, and then see how many completed the CME CE so far. We have a deadline coming up for claiming it, and just is there something even from like the membership side that we can take away from that to help them finalize before that window closes, and then also think into next year and as proposal submissions start to kind of roll in. But I don't know if you saw Dina's comment in the chat, Raja.
Yeah, I love that. Yeah, Dina says have a high level discussion about timelines so we are aligned. That's great. Yeah. And high level discussion, and hopefully with some more tools or more adoption, Dina, that hopefully would help with that alignment.
I think another thing you can do is just kind of ask the question to each other. What are some of your biggest pain points right now? And then maybe through those responses, you can see if any of the things that you're currently doing within your role and department might help them solve for those pain points.
Totally. And Polly says she'd like to see more towards patient-centric, tracking like how many rehospitalizations this year versus next. Great point, Polly. And then hopefully use that data to plan your live and online activities. Yeah. Love that. Just curious, Polly, do you have what kind of data sources would you typically look at for getting the patient data or patient-centric data?
Yeah, so that relies a lot because we're a third party, and we're not member oriented. We are, each of our clients are individual academic institutions usually, and it does require them sharing certain data, so to get us to that level, or in their own departments. And we're having better luck at departmental level than we are at institutional level. And I think the institution is worried about the numbers across the board. So I'm always intrigued when, we get to work with societies and associations who have the membership that are willing to share that data. So that when we have them as our partners, that always helps.
Great. Yeah, and one other thing I've seen with, especially with AI and LLMs, the more our customers tend to ask about anonymized and percentage level data, the easier that's shared as well. So that again, I know the context is a little different, but sometimes just anonymizing it and saying, just tell us approximately what percentage or your top 5 areas, uh, that has also given hopefully less resistance from the leadership. Wonderful. Any other questions from the team? Questions, feedback, or comments?
Well, if you have any questions or feedback, please don't hesitate to reach out to either of us. I can put my email in the chat. Thank you so much to GMC PCMA for having us. Rasha, I didn't know if you had any closing words before I think Erica closes this out.
Well, yeah, thank you, Jen. Thank you so much. Thanks to the PCMA team for giving us this opportunity. Thank you all for spending your afternoon with us. We hope you took a thing or two from this session, and here's to more collaboration and more member satisfaction.